chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. He has literally become the voice to prepare the Department of Defense for the upcoming 2027-2035 China fight. You are well aware that he has been a strong advocate for Navy shipbuilding, and I'm very confident that we will be getting some insight into President Trump's new Office of Shipbuilding as well. Please welcome Representative Rob Wittman.
Well, good morning, folks. Good morning. All right, we can do better than that. I know it's early. Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, gosh, what an honor and privilege it is to be here with you today and to reflect on the challenges that we have ahead. You know, I always look at the glass as being half full, but I can tell you the challenges are many. If you look at where we are today, I think that really it's a unique point in the history of the United States because we have a confluence of a number of challenges. We have, obviously, a fiscal challenge. How are we going to take the resources that we have and make best use of them? How do we do that across the spectrum where the challenges are bigger than ever? In fact, I would argue where we are today as a globe is very similar to where the world was in 1938 with the rise of the axes of evil. If you look today, the rise of China, what's happening with Russia, what's happening with North Korea and Iran, we're at that same point where the forces of evil are there trying to overwhelm the nations that believe in the rule of law, that believe in the things that must be done in order to preserve the liberties and freedoms and the dignity of human beings. That's pretty fundamental. So the challenge for us is, how do we make sure that we are able to utilize our resources to maximum utility? How do we get more per our dollar than the Chinese get per their yuan? How do we enhance further relationships with friends that believe in the same thing that we believe in? And how do we make sure we do all of that within the context of where we are today, and how do we modernize? How do we actually kind of change the track that we're on? I mean, you look at what China's doing today. China, at every turn, is trying to dominate supply chains. Look at what they're doing in areas like critical minerals and rare earth elements. We need to be doing the same. We need to be able to outcompete China when it comes to that. We've got a long ways to go there, folks. We have to get back into the mining business here in the United States. We have to look at where our supply chains are today, where we can enhance those supply chains, where can we interdict where China's trying to dominate us economically. Look at the things that they're doing, too, on just military capability. You know, as little as 5 years ago, we said, well, we're not too worried about the number of ships that China has because their ships just aren't that good. They're not as good as ours. Well, look today, folks. Look at the Liu Yang destroyers. Pretty doggone good ships. Ren Hai cruisers. Pretty doggone good ships. So those things, I think, need to inform what we have to do in order to catch up. And we are behind. Look at what's happening in Europe. Look at the aggressive behavior by Russia. It'll be interesting to see if they're really interested in entering into a peace agreement. And if not, where does that leave us? I argue, too, we need to do more to make sure that NATO stands up, because I think NATO nations are finally starting to realize this threat is not going to go away. Even if there's some sort of peace settlement there with Ukraine, Russia is not going to stop their aggressive behavior. Look at what they've done to rebuild their defense infrastructure over the last 3 years. That's not going away. So our challenge is how do we do the things necessary to catch up? I mean, you put on top of that what's happening in the Middle East. Now finally addressing the issues with the Houthis. You see just what happened yesterday now with going back after Hamas because they aren't interested in really getting to a lasting peace. That continues to create that uncertainty around the world. The things that Congress has to do is to make sure that we are modernizing at the speed of relevance. If you look just in the tactical air and land area, CCAs, you heard from General Alvin, CCAs are going to be key moving forward. I want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to have that combat collaborative aircraft out there. That's going to be an enabler for much of what we have today. Counter UAS. If you just look here in CONUS, look at the things we're having to deal with here. And I think that those efforts where you see incursions of UAS across the United States at military bases, I think that's probing that's happening by our adversaries. And they're figuring out what's the response going to be? How's the United States going to respond to that? I would argue we haven't done a real good job of that to this point. We have to invigorate our effort on counter UAS. We have to make sure, too, we're rebuilding our munitions stockpiles, our missile stockpiles, because of all the munitions that we have sent overseas. We're in a pretty precarious position with what we have to do in our stockpiles. We also have to modernize. You know, we focused on precision for years. But while we focused on precision, our adversaries have focused on range and lethality. But you know what? We actually have created the technology here that allows that range and lethality, especially when it gets to energetics. I mean, we've invented modern energetics. The problem is we don't use them in our own weapon systems. So we have to do more there. We're finally getting on track to make sure we're modernizing energetics. F-35, a platform that 23 years ago was designed for the European theater, and now we're struggling to make it work in the Indo-PACOM. That modernization has to take place. Technical Refresh 3 has to get operationalized faster. We have to make sure the digital aperture system gets integrated faster. New radars, APG-85, all those things have to happen faster because the challenge in the Indo-Pacific is real and it's here at our doorstep. Look, too, on the sea power side, the place where we have operational superiority is under the sea. And yet today, as we look, where we should be building 2.3 Virginia-class submarines per year based upon our obligation under AUKUS and what we need to replace the 88-class submarines, the Los Angeles-class submarines, we should be doing 2.3 submarines a year. We're at about 1.3 right now. We have to do more, and folks, the three big issues in shipbuilding, the three top issues in shipbuilding are workforce, workforce, and workforce. And we have to make sure that we get up to speed on that because we are not going to get to where we need to be until we do that. And we have to make sure, too, we look at how do we attract shipbuilders there. And if you look at salary disparities, what's happened is post-COVID, a lot of other salary scales have come up. The salary scales for shipbuilders kind of stayed stagnant, so we have to make sure we're increasing that. The Shipyard Accountability and Workforce Support Act, better known as SAWS, is a great way to do that, to move some of the money to the left. Had a great meeting with our OMB director, had great conversations about how do we try to make some of those things happen. I think that has to be part of where things go in the future. We have to understand, too, that the world we live in today is about modernizing our military. That's why last year I formed the Defense Modernization Caucus, because we have to think innovatively about how we do things. Listen, we're going to continue to need exquisite platforms. They will definitely have a role. But we have got to be able to operationalize and field large numbers of attritables and expendables. That's the only way we're going to be able to close the gap with the Chinese. It's the only way that we increase their risk calculus when they look at scenarios in the Indo-Pacific. You look at the things they've done to counter our exquisite platforms, and I argue we have some good countermeasures, but we have to be able to do things in mass. Attritables and expendables are going to be able to get us there. We also have to change our mindset about how we operate. We have to make sure that our systems of hardware are software-driven. This is a software-informed world, and unfortunately today we're still in the hardware area, how the Pentagon operates. So I want to make sure we're doing those things to assure that we have the capability and capacity moving forward. This dynamic environment should challenge us all. It should challenge us all to think differently, to make sure, too, that we are doing things at the speed of relevance. This year in the NDAA, we're going to be emphasizing acquisition reform. You know, how do we look at things? Last year we did some things to refine the authority to operate, the ATOs. We want to make sure we're doing more to enable places like Defense Innovation Unit to get dollars and resources quicker to the COCOMs, to the operational commands. That's really where the rubber hits the road. So we want to find different ways to do that. We want to make sure we compress the acquisition cycle. We want to make sure, too, that as technology and innovation comes to the surface, we want to encourage those small companies to be part of the defense industrial base enterprise. You know, a lot of smaller companies get intimidated by that, but you do see that there are smaller companies that have graduated into that realm. You look at a company like Anduril. When we talk about what do we do today to produce, you know, the old days of production line, we have to go through tooling and castings, and it takes years to do that and years to get to production and then years to get to operationalization. Can't do that anymore. But if you look at some of the new ideas, concepts that Anduril's doing, things like hyperscale production. So you take a production line where this week you're producing drones. The next week you're producing engines for missiles. You can change that production line, and instead of worrying about old production methods like castings and machining, what you're doing now is going to digital printing. And so you can change the production on literally on a dime. That's what it's going to take today because we just don't have the luxury of time. And we have to be able to produce things in mass. We have to be flexible. That's what's going to give us the advantage over our adversaries. And that has to be done on a large scale. So the concept that we see out there is really going to, I think, change how we operate and how we acquire systems and then how we operationalize systems from production to actually putting them in the hands of the warfighter. So I look at it as a glass half full. The challenges have never been greater, but the opportunities have never been greater. Listen, we as a nation are the best innovators and creators on the planet, period. The way the Chinese have tried to catch up to us is they have become the best liars, the best cheats, and the best thieves on the planet. And they make no apologies about it. You know, they're out there, they're saying, hey, listen, we don't have to create things. All we got to do is steal them from you. So we've got to do a better job in being even better at creating and innovating. But we also have to make sure we're protecting the things that we create here in the United States. I argue we still have that advantage, that strategic advantage, that tactical advantage, but it doesn't come easy, and it takes a lot to operationalize that, but it also takes a lot to protect that. We have to do those things going forward, and I believe that we have the capability to do that. I think everybody across the nation needs to be aware of what we're facing. I think this is an all-hands-on-deck moment for this nation, and I think everybody in a leadership position here needs to communicate to the American people what it will take to make sure that we can prevail in this competition, to make sure we can prevail against the building forces of evil around the world. This is hard work, and it takes everybody on board to make sure that that happens. You in this room are going to be part of that. You're going to be at the tip of the spear to make sure those things happen. But all of us have to communicate what it will take for us to achieve that. This nation is up for the task. I am a firm believer that if we tell the American people what's necessary, what we all need to do to get there, they're willing to go on the journey with us. But we have to tell them what it's going to take to make that happen. I think we're in for it, and I think that we are up for the challenge, and we will absolutely make that happen. So with that, let me go to your questions, thoughts, ideas, and concerns. I'll do my best to answer your questions.
So, Mr. Wittman,
yes.
As we approach a full year continuing resolution, I think a lot of hopes are riding on reconciliation and potential $25 billion increase to DoD top line. In your view, how should that be split across modernization, readiness, and other accounts?
Listen, that's a great question. I think we're going to end up somewhere north of $100 billion for defense budgets. The challenge for us is how do we make sure we properly allocate that? I want to assure that when those dollars are operationalized, that we prioritize those systems, those capabilities, those capacities that can get to the warfighter the fastest. I'd like to push more resources down to the COCOMs, more resources down to the operational commands. Because if you look today about how things happen, you look at OSD, and you look at it and say, well, they developed the national defense strategy, the national security strategy. So that takes, some time to do. And by the time that gets produced and you read it, you look at it and go, golly dang, that doesn't really reflect the threats today. It's a little bit behind the curve. And then you look at the service branches who use the POM to do their planning, and you read that and you go, well, maybe the POM's a little bit behind where it is. But if you really want to get an indicator of where the risk is today, where the challenges are today, go to the COCOM's UFOR list and read that, and you'll get a little bit better indication about where things are. Our challenge is how do we get dollars in a fast and effective way closer to the operational needs? How do we get that in the hands of the warfighter? And listen, we have some really creative and innovative folks out there, so we're going to have to be able to do that. So I'm not looking specifically, Jeff, necessarily at programs, but I'm looking at, where are the capability gaps today? Where are the things that we need to close gaps quickly and make sure that we get the money to those places? I would argue the folks there closer to the operational side know better than we do. And I want to make sure, too, that it's not all about, big programs. Obviously, we need to be building submarines, ramping those things up. But it's also about getting those dollars out there for these attritable and expendable systems. And I want to make sure, too, that we understand that those needs are different in many areas. So the need for UAS and counter-UAS is going to be different in CENTCOM than it is in EUCOM, than it is in INDOPACOM. Let's make sure we provide some flexibility there and make sure we operationalize dollars so they can get capability and capacity in the hands of the warfighter quickly. That's going to be the key in my mind in how we operationalize those dollars.
Question over here on your right, sir.
Yes.
Stu Magnuson, National Defense Magazine.
Yes.
Are you concerned at all about DOGE cutting basic research and development, letting go young scientists? Because certainly China's not going to retreat from doing basic R&D. Of course, our corporations aren't that interested in basic R&D because that's not what they do necessarily. So are we going to be retreating on that, letting China just fill in the void?
As DOGE goes into the Defense Department, they're going to be looking at things there. It'll be interesting to see what their findings are. I do believe that we need to invest in research and development. There is a role for government there. There is a role on the private side. The key for us is to make sure that we encourage the private side investment. The way that we can make sure that investment takes place, make sure that venture capitalists and private equity looks to invest there, is we have to create the demand signal. And the demand signal has to be consistent. If we do that, as I talk to folks out there, there's plenty of private capital that will flow to those places. There are also things that we need to do to look at how do we operationalize the dollars that we spend. So when we're sending money to DARPA, and DARPA does some great work, the thing that concerns me is you go to the shelf and look at a lot of the DARPA studies there and you go, wow, that's an incredible technology. Show me where it's operationalized. It's not operationalized. And you go, well, why is that? DARPA says, well, we're just a research and development agency. We cannot advocate for the things that we do. We have to find a customer for it. We have to make sure we're drawing the link to say if we're putting money into research and development, technology and engineering, we have to make sure that there is a conduit, some way, shape, or form for that to actually be operationalized. Because we can spend a lot of money on great science projects, but we have to make sure that those investments are yielding capability and capacity. So I would argue that we have to make sure we close the gap. So as we're making those investments, and I do believe government needs to make those investments, we have to make sure that those investments don't get put on the shelf, that they actually get into the hands of the warfighter in some way, shape, or form.
Morning, sir. Nick Wilson with Inside Defense. We have this new White House announced recently.
Yes.
My question is, what kind of communication has been happening between the White House and Congress on that office? And then, in your view, what can the office do for industry in particular that the Navy or the Pentagon haven't done?
Great question. The question was about the new Office of Shipbuilding and what interactions are they going to have with Congress? What are the things that they can do that the Navy or the Maritime Administration or others haven't done? Well, first of all, the good news is that the director there used to be on the House Sea Power staff. So there's a great knowledge about what's happening there and the things that need to happen. I think the communication has to happen with Congress and the Office of Shipbuilding. Where the Office of Shipbuilding has, I think, the greatest opportunity is to look at what we need to do to, again, begin with workforce. How do we grow the workforce? Because you're not going to do anything out there to be able to ramp up shipbuilding until you address the issue with workforce. Secondly is you have to look at, how do we utilize the resources that we have to a greater extent? My challenge is this. As we look at what happens across the spectrum with skills in the shipbuilding and ship repair realm, those tend to happen in two separate buckets. So ship repair happens over here and shipbuilding happens over here. But guess what? The skill sets for both of those are the same. So the question is why aren't we coordinating? Why aren't we looking at the capability that's unutilized in those ship repair yards that are on the roller coaster ride? Because they have all this work that comes to the yards. So the dry docks and the berths are full for 3 years, and all of a sudden, boom, the work goes away. And then those workers are laid off. And when you lay them off, they're not coming back. Those are skills that are marketable elsewhere. So they're not coming back into that realm. Why aren't we taking the skill sets that are in the ship repair industry and smoothing out that sand chart, smoothing out to make sure the demand is there? Why don't we enable them to help in ship construction? Why aren't they building panels for nuclear submarines? They don't have to do the reactor work, but they can do work to supplement the shipbuilding elements. They can do it for surface ships. They can do it for aircraft carriers and smooth out the demand curve. And then we're utilizing the full workforce capability there across the spectrum. We have to be able to coordinate that. And then we have to look at how do we build the necessary capability to build commercial ships. You know, it can't all be gray hulls. We look at what happened to the Philadelphia shipyard, a great example about what can happen. We look, too, about foreign companies that are in the shipbuilding business want to partner here. Now, listen, I'm not in favor of us building gray hulls overseas, period. We need to build them here, but I don't have an issue with partnering with companies that have that operational experience and saying, what can we do to quickly build capability and capacity here? So we have to make sure that that skill sets are transferable from ship repair to shipbuilding, and we have to make sure, too, that then that graduates us into a commercial shipbuilding enterprise. And if you grow that workforce, then I think we have the capability necessary for us to get back to where we need to be. Listen, we are way behind the curve today. If you look at it, the Chinese have 232 times the shipbuilding capacity as the United States. I mean, it's not even it's not even 10 or 12. It is orders of magnitude greater. That's a challenge for us.
Yes, sir. Well spoken, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. Thank you.
You can